R's prick at her eyes, pride, fear, and awe all mingled in her chest. This human, the one she had married for peace, was doing the impossible. One man was dismantling an army, not with sheer power alone, but with courage that refused to bend, strategy that defied expectation, and heart that could not be broken. Finally, the rogue generals were forced to retreat, their soldiers scattering in disarray. Kale, bloodied and exhausted, stood in the center of the battlefield, chest heaving, eyes blazing with unyielding determination. The city had survived, not because of superior numbers or technology, but because a single human refused to surrender. Ilara descended from the balcony, rushing to him as the last enemy fled. Kale turned, meeting her gaze with a faint smile, exhaustion and triumph mingling on his face. "It is not over," he said, voice steady despite the chaos around them. "But this battle, we have shown them what courage can do." Ilara's eyes filled with tears. She had witnessed history, had seen her human husband become a symbol of hope, unity, and unstoppable will. And she knew, without doubt, that no one would ever see humans the same way again. That night, the city celebrated quietly. The battle was won, but the lesson remained. One human, fearless and determined, had changed the course of the fight and inspired an entire people. Ilara held Kale's hand, feeling the weight of his bravery and the promise of a future built on more than politics, on courage, heart, and unshakable human will. Twilight draped the battlefield in shades of deep purple and gold, casting long shadows over the scattered remnants of the rogue army. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with the fading light, and the air was thick with the scent of dust and blood. Most of the enemy had fled, but the rogue generals remained, determined to salvage honor from the ruins of their army. They moved like predators, circling the lone figure of Kale, whose silhouette was stark against the dying sun. Princess Ilara rode out to the battlefield, her cloak flapping in the wind. Her heart pounded, but she could not look away. She had seen Kale defy every expectation, survive impossible odds, and rally an entire army with his courage alone. Yet now, facing the generals who had orchestrated the conflict, even he would be tested as never before. "Kale," she called, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. He looked toward her, exhaustion and determination etched into every line of his face. "I am ready," he said simply, as if the day's impossible feats had been merely preparation. There was no fear in his eyes, only an unyielding resolve that made the rogue generals pause. They had expected a man, human and mortal, to falter under the weight of his odds. Instead, they faced a warrior who seemed untouchable, not because he could not be hurt, but because his spirit refused to bend. The generals advanced, their weapons raised, forming a tight circle. Kale took a slow, deliberate step forward. His movements were measured, almost casual, but every motion carried deadly intent. Blaster fire crackled, swords clanged, and yet he moved through it all like a force of nature, striking decisively, avoiding reckless swings, and exploiting every weakness. Each time a general attempted to flank him, he countered effortlessly, turning their own attacks into opportunities to advance. Ilara watched, breathless, as the scene unfolded. She had expected strategy, skill, and strength, but she had never imagined courage could be so tangible, so infectious. With every strike, Kale inspired those around him. Valorian soldiers who had once clung to fear and uncertainty now surged forward, surrounding the rogue generals with renewed confidence. They were no longer fighting alone. They followed Kale because he had shown them that human bravery could ignite a tide of hope. Minutes stretched into an eternity, as Kale battled with precision and unyielding energy. Bloodied but unbroken, he fought not for glory, but for life, for peace, and for the trust of the princess who had come to believe in him more deeply than any law or treaty. The rogue generals, once arrogant and confident, faltered under his relentless pressure. Their formations cracked, their courage wavered, and the threat they had posed dissolved under the unstoppable combination of Kale's skill and sheer human determination. Finally, the generals dropped their weapons, exhaustion and disbelief in their eyes. Kale stood, chest heaving, his armor battered, but his spirit unbowed. Ilara rode to his side, her eyes shining with tears of relief and pride. You have done the impossible," she whispered, barely able to contain her emotion. Kale shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "No," he said gently. "We did this, together, every life, every soldier. Every heart that chose to stand, that is what won today." The city below began to celebrate cautiously, the air filled with whispers of amazement and reverence. Word would spread, stories would be told, but the truth was clear. One human had changed the outcome of a battle that had seemed hopeless, inspiring loyalty, courage, and hope where fear had once ruled. Illyra's heart swelled as she realized that courage was contagious, that humans carried within them a spark that could ignite entire worlds, and that Kale had become a living symbol of that truth. As the sun disappeared completely behind the horizon, Illyra and Kale stood together on the battlefield, weary but unbroken. The rogue generals were defeated, the city was safe, and the impossible had been achieved. Yet the princess knew that more challenges would come. But she also knew this, with a human like Kale by her side, there was no storm too great, no enemy too powerful, and no hope too fragile to endure. The first light of dawn crept over Valor City, casting the crystal spires in soft shades of gold and pink. The city was quiet now, the echoes of battle replaced by the hum of cautious relief. Smoke lingered in the distance, a reminder of the war that had almost consumed them. But the streets were filled with Valorians who looked alive again, eyes bright with awe and gratitude. Princess Illyra stood on the palace balcony, Kale beside her, both of them watching the city breathe. The victory had been decisive, though hard-won. The rogue generals were captured or in flight, their army scattered like leaves in the wind. The city had survived not because of superior numbers or overwhelming technology, but because of one human who had refused to surrender when every hope seemed lost. Kale's courage had turned fear into inspiration, hopelessness into action. Soldiers, citizens, and even the skeptics among the Valorians now whispered his name with reverence. Illyra felt a swell of pride and admiration as she looked at him. Kale was exhausted, his armor dented, his body streaked with blood and dust, but he stood tall, unwavering. He had fought not for glory or recognition, but for the people who had doubted him, for the princess who had placed her trust in him, and for the fragile dream of peace. Her heart tightened with emotion. She realized more deeply than ever that courage was not measured in strength alone, but in the willingness to stand when the world demands you fall. The citizens gathered in the main square, their faces full of wonder as they recounted stories of Kale's solo stand. Children pointed at him with wide eyes, soldiers saluted him with respect, and elders murmured blessings for the human who had changed their fate. Illyra stepped forward, taking Kale's hand in hers. "You have done more than any law, treaty, or alliance ever could," she said softly. "You have shown them, all of us, what courage truly means." Kale shook his head with a faint smile, exhaustion lining his features. "I only stood," he replied, "because they followed. Every Valorian who joined me, every heart that believed in peace, that is what won today. I am nothing without them." His humility only made the admiration for him grow stronger in Illyra's heart. She realized then that humans, though smaller and seemingly fragile, carried a spirit that could inspire, ignite, and endure beyond measure. The celebrations that followed were not extravagant. There were no grand feasts, no endless speeches. Instead, there was quiet gratitude, the kind that comes from knowing a city has survived because of bravery, unity, and heart. Illyra walked among her people, holding Kale close, listening to their words of awe. She saw a city transformed not by treaties or politics, but by the courage of one human who refused to give in, who carried hope like a blazing torch into the darkness. As evening fell, Illyra and Kale returned to the palace balcony. The city below sparkled under lantern light, alive and safe. She looked at him, her eyes glistening with tears of relief and love. "Do you realize what you have done?" she whispered. Kale took a deep breath, gazing at the horizon where the desert met the sky. "Yes," he said quietly. "And I hope we never forget that courage can move mountains, that hope can outshine fear, and that one person can change the world when they refuse to yield." In that moment, the princess understood something profound. Humans were not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the most numerous, but their spirit, their heart, and their willingness to fight when all seemed lost could inspire entire civilizations. The galaxy might never have fully realized their potential, but Valor City had seen it firsthand. One human had changed history, and in doing so, he had forged a future where hope could thrive. As the stars appeared overhead, Illyra rested her head on Kale's shoulder. The city was at peace, the impossible had been achieved, and the legacy of courage would be remembered for generations. One human had stood alone, and in doing so, had shown a universe that bravery, heart, and determination could overcome any odds. And that, she knew, was a P. The palace gates stood silent under the golden light of the twin suns, their tall iron bars casting long shadows on the marble courtyard. Time had changed the palace little on the outside, but inside, The halls seemed quieter, emptier, as if waiting for something or someone to return. Queen Leora walked slowly along the corridor that led to the main balcony. Her fingers brushed the cool stone walls as memories of laughter, tears, and vanished years floated before her eyes. She had ruled wisely, kept the kingdom safe, but in her heart, a hollow ache remained. Her daughter Mara had vanished long ago into the stars, leaving only faint whispers of her existence, and with her absence, a piece of Leora's soul had gone missing too. It was then that the gates creaked open. A small group of travelers entered, their silhouettes framed by the late afternoon light. At first, Leora could not believe her eyes. There was Mara. She had returned, taller, stronger, her hair streaked with silver from distant suns, her face hardened by countless trials, yet still unmistakably her daughter. But what truly took Leora's breath away were the two children beside her. They clung to Mara's sides, their fingers entwined with hers, looking out at the palace with a mixture of awe and caution. Their eyes, wide and bright, shimmered with a strange light, hinting at the worlds they had come from. They were human, yes, but also something extraordinary. The courtyard, usually filled with the sounds of servants and guards, fell utterly silent. Soldiers straightened their posture, eyes narrowing, whispers bouncing from one corner to another. Rumors of humans traveling the stars had circulated for decades. Tales of wild, unearthly beings who defied reason. But none had expected them to appear at the palace gates, standing there as a family, as if claiming the kingdom itself. Leora's heart raced. She had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. Mara's gaze found hers across the distance, and in that look, 1,000 emotions passed silently: apology, hope, love, and longing. Mara stepped forward, her voice steady yet carrying the weight of years apart. "Mother," she said simply, "I have returned." The words seemed to echo against the stone walls, carrying with it the sound of homecoming, yet also the tremor of fear. Her children peeked around her legs, shy but curious. One, a boy with hair like spun copper and eyes that mirrored the blue of the sky beyond the palace walls, blinked in confusion at the soldiers' stern faces. The girl, smaller and delicate, held onto Mara's hand tightly, her own eyes wide as though trying to read the world she had never known. The queen's breath caught in her throat. Emotions collided inside her like waves against rocks. Relief fought fear, love battled caution. This daughter, this family, had returned from the edge of the galaxy, carrying not only memories of the past, but also the promise of something new, something extraordinary. Leora's advisors murmured, uneasy and tense, but she could not hear them. Her eyes never left Mara's. She saw the woman her daughter had become, but also the child she once held in her arms, the small fingers that had once wrapped around her own. For a long moment, no one spoke. The palace seemed to hold its breath. Mara took another step forward, and her children followed, their tiny feet making soft sounds on the marble. The sunlight glinted off their unusual features, their human forms mingling with hints of alien grace. Leora felt tears sting her eyes. This was her family. They were here. After years of emptiness, after years of longing, they had returned. Finally, Leora opened her arms, and Mara hesitated, then rushed forward. The children clung to both of them, and for the first time in decades, the palace was filled with warmth, laughter, and the fragile, beautiful promise of reunion. Somewhere deep inside, Leora knew that their arrival would not be simple. It would bring challenges, questions, and perhaps even danger. Yet in that instant, none of it mattered. Her daughter was home, her grandchildren were alive, and the kingdom had glimpsed a future it had never dared imagine, a future intertwined with the stars themselves. The palace was restless that evening. Word of Mara's return had spread quickly, traveling faster than any messenger could have hoped. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, golden shadows stretching across the marble floors, the halls were alive with murmurs and questions. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes wide with curiosity. Soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons, wary of the strangers who had crossed the stars and entered the kingdom unannounced. And yet, Queen Leora felt a strange calm beneath the tension. Her daughter had returned, alive and whole. And with her came the children whose very existence defied every expectation. Mara walked through the palace corridors with quiet confidence, her children close at her heels. The boy, taller of the two, observed everything with cautious curiosity, his eyes reflecting the torch's flames and a mind that seemed to calculate each movement around him. The girl, smaller and gentler, clung to her mother's skirts, her gaze darting from tapestry to statue, absorbing every detail with awe. Both children were different, so human, yet unlike any human Leora had ever seen. They carried strength in their small bodies and wisdom in their eyes, as if the universe itself had left its mark on them. Despite her pride, Leora could not ignore the tension curling through the court. Advisors gathered in hushed clusters, their expressions a mixture of fear and suspicion. "They cannot be trusted," one whispered. "We do not know the powers they may hold," said another. Rumors of humans traveling the stars often spoke of unpredictability, of strange abilities that bent reality in subtle, impossible ways. The advisor's unease was understandable, yet it gnawed at the queen's heart. Could she turn away her own daughter because of fear? Could she treat her grandchildren, her blood, as a threat merely for being different? Leora called a meeting in the great hall, her voice steady but firm. Mara entered, flanked by her children, and the court fell silent. Every eye turned toward the newcomers, studying them as if trying to discover hidden dangers in their every movement. Mara bowed deeply to her mother, her children mimicking the gesture with hesitant grace. "Mother, I come in peace," Mara said, her tone carrying both respect and longing. "We have traveled far, survived much, and we seek only a home here with you." The room shifted uneasily. Some courtiers whispered among themselves, uncomfortable with the blend of human and alien traits in Mara's children. Their voices were gentle yet commanding, their presence almost magnetic. The boy stepped forward, holding out a small metallic object that shimmered faintly. "We mean no harm," he said, his voice small but clear. The girl offered a simple smile, her innocence cutting through the tension like sunlight through clouds. Leora felt her heart swell. Her grandchildren were brave yet tender. They carried the essence of humanity, the courage, the compassion, the curiosity that had always defined their kind. Even so, doubts lingered in the palace. Mara's journey had been long and dangerous, and no one could know what had shaped her or her children. What enemies had they faced? What powers had they acquired along the way? Some feared the unknown, imagining that the children's unusual abilities might one day challenge the kingdom itself. Leora listened quietly to the council's arguments, feeling the old ache of separation resurface. She wanted to protect her daughter, but she also feared for the kingdom she had sworn to safeguard. Could love alone be enough to bridge the gap between hope and caution? As the evening wore on, Leora found herself walking alongside Mara through the quiet palace gardens. The children chased fireflies, their laughter soft yet full of life, echoing across the courtyard. Mara's hand brushed her mother's arm, a gentle reminder of the bond that had never truly been broken. "They are strong," Mara said quietly, her eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "They are human, yes, but more they carry the best of what we are and what we can become." Leora nodded, her chest tight with emotion. She could see it, the spark of humanity, the fire of courage and hope that refused to be dimmed. For the first time in years, Leora allowed herself to believe. Perhaps with her daughter and grandchildren here, the kingdom could not only survive the future, but thrive. And perhaps the humans who had returned from the stars were not a threat, they were a gift. A living, breathing reminder that love, courage, and family could overcome even the greatest fear. Mara's stories of the stars filled the palace halls with wonder and unease. Every evening, after the court's meetings and cautious glances, she would gather her children in the library, a room lined with books older than the kingdom itself, and speak of the world she had seen. She spoke of cities that floated above oceans of light, of forests that breathed and moved, of beings who could shape matter with thought. The children listened, eyes wide, absorbing every detail with an instinctive understanding. Though small, they spoke fluently of places no one on the palace world had ever imagined, their voices carrying the cadence of distant languages mingled with human tones. Leora watched them silently from a doorway, her heart torn between awe and fear. Her daughter had survived what no human was meant to endure, and now she had returned, carrying children who were living bridges between two worlds. The boy, taller and more confident each day, demonstrated a curiosity that sometimes startled the palace staff. He would touch objects and observe them for long moments, whispering numbers or patterns that seemed to make the walls themselves hum softly. The girl, delicate yet sharp, could sense moods in people, responding to tension or sorrow with gentle words or comforting gestures. Leora realized that her grandchildren were not merely human. They were humans shaped by the cosmos itself, touched by experiences that could give them unimaginable potential, yet potential often comes wrapped in danger. Advisors murmured in shadowed corners, questioning the wisdom of welcoming the children so openly. What if their abilities are uncontrollable? One asked, brow furrowed. What if they attract attention from enemies who lurk beyond the stars? Another whispered about rebellions and uprisings, cautioning that these hybrids, admired or feared, might one day challenge the established order. Leora's stomach tightened at every word. She had returned to her daughter with love in her heart. Yet the kingdom she had protected for decades now seemed fragile, vulnerable to both internal fear and external threats. One night, the children surprised even Mara with their quick adaptation. While exploring a small wing of the palace that had been unused for years, the boy accidentally activated a device hidden behind a panel, a relic of the ancient world. It flickered to life, displaying moving images of distant galaxies. The girl traced her fingers across the projection, and the stars seemed to respond, shifting patterns as though guided by her touch. Mara and Leora exchanged astonished glances. The palace, centuries old and filled with human history, had never seen anything like this. Their children were not just observers. They could influence the world around them in ways that felt magical, yet entirely natural. The queen's heart swelled with pride, but it was shadowed by the weight of responsibility. These children, though innocent, were powerful. And power, when misunderstood, often led to fear, and fear could lead to destruction. Leora knew that the kingdom must learn to accept them, to see them not as threats, but as heirs of both human courage and cosmic wisdom. Mara's voice, steady and filled with quiet conviction, reminded her of another truth. Love could be stronger than fear. And bravery often came in forms the kingdom had never known. Outside the palace, a wind blew softly across the courtyards, carrying whispers from distant lands. Mara gazed at the night sky, her children by her side, and spoke of the alliances she had formed in far-off worlds, of the friends and enemies who awaited across the galaxy. The children, fearless in their curiosity, listened intently. They understood more than the court could imagine. Their minds, sharpened by distant suns, held secrets the palace could scarcely dream of. Leora stood silently behind them, seeing not only her daughter, but a glimpse of the future, a future shaped by courage, humanity, and the enduring spark of life that refused to be confined to a single world. By the end of the night, as torches burned low in the corridors, Leora allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Her daughter had returned, her grandchildren were alive, and the palace had become a place where the ordinary and the extraordinary could coexist. Yet beneath the pride and wonder lingered the truth. The kingdom would face challenges it had never known. And only by embracing humanity's courage, its unpredictability, its daring, its unyielding spirit, could it hope to survive what lay ahead. And in the quiet of that ancient library, Leora realized that she was ready to face those challenges. Together with her daughter and her extraordinary grandchildren, the palace had never felt so tense. Though Mara and her children had settled into the halls, their presence stirred uncertainty among the advisors, the guards, and even some distant nobles. Whispers followed them through every corridor. Some feared the unknown, imagining that the children's strange abilities might one day challenge the authority of the crown. Others, more cautious, admired the subtle courage they had witnessed in Mara, the way she walked through the palace with quiet strength, her children always close, always alert, always graceful. Yet admiration could not erase fear, and fear was a powerful thing, capable of shaping loyalty and suspicion alike. That one afternoon, the boy wandered into the throne room while practicing with a small device Mara had brought from her travels. It glowed faintly in his hands, spinning images of stars and distant planets. The courtiers gasped, some stepping back as if the child carried fire. The girl approached cautiously, her small hand hovering over the projections. To everyone's astonishment, the stars shifted in response to her movements, tracing new patterns and constellations that had never been recorded in the kingdom's history. Murmurs ran through the room like wildfire. The advisors whispered urgently among themselves, questioning the queen's judgment. What powers were these? Could the children control them fully, or was this only the beginning of a force they could not contain? Leora stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "They are my grandchildren," she said, "and they are under my protection. Their abilities are not threats, they are gifts. Gifts that come from courage, intelligence, and the love of a family who has crossed galaxies to return home." Her words carried the weight of authority, but even she could feel the unease lingering in the corners of the throne room. Mara nodded, standing beside her mother with her children close. "We have survived dangers that no one here has ever seen," Mara said softly, yet with undeniable conviction. "We are not here to harm, only to belong. We ask only for understanding." Yet understanding is not easily earned when fear runs deep. That evening, Mara took her children to the gardens. hoping the quiet of nature would help them relax after the scrutiny of the day. The girl knelt beside a fountain, tracing the ripples with her fingers. The water responded, bending and twisting into shapes that resembled distant worlds, shimmering under the moonlight. The boy followed, testing small stones that hovered briefly in the air before returning gently to the ground. Leora watched from a distance, heart full of awe and pride, but also aware of the fragile balance she had to maintain. The palace had to accept them slowly. Any misstep could rekindle suspicion, or worse, incite fear into rebellion. Even Mara sensed the tension. She knew that outsiders, other kingdoms and traders would hear of her children's abilities. Rumors would spread, and soon she feared envy and greed might follow. "They will be tested," Mara whispered to Leora, her eyes scanning the distant stars visible beyond the palace walls. "And we must be ready to prove that courage and humanity can stand stronger than fear." Leora nodded, understanding her daughter fully. These were not ordinary children, and their presence would change the kingdom forever. Yet she believed, as she always had, that the spark of humanity, its bravery, intelligence, and compassion could overcome even the most hardened doubts. That night, as the palace slept, a quiet calm settled over the courtyard. The children lay beneath the stars, pointing out constellations and tracing patterns in the sky. Their laughter was soft, like the echo of distant worlds, filling the palace with warmth. Mara and Leora stood nearby, watching, their hearts both proud and anxious. The challenges were only beginning. But in that moment, they were together. And the palace had glimpsed the extraordinary within the ordinary, the human courage that had carried them across the stars and back to their home. The night ended with hope. The advisors would continue to debate, and the kingdom would take time to accept the new reality. But Mara and her children had shown the first glimpse of what they could be, a family whose courage and humanity were not bound by fear, who could inspire the palace to see beyond prejudice and suspicion. And in that quiet, starlit moment, Leora realized that the greatest battles were not fought with weapons alone, but with the hearts and minds of those brave enough to embrace what was different, yet undeniably human. The court had never been more divided. Days after Mara's return, arguments echoed through the palace halls, some polite, others sharp and bitter. Advisors gathered in small clusters, voices low but tense, each one insisting that the presence of Mara's children was either a blessing or a danger. Some nobles feared the unknown, whispering that the children's abilities could bring ruin, that their influence might grow beyond control. Others, braver and more open-minded, argued that the hybrids carried the promise of a stronger, wiser kingdom, children shaped by experience and courage far beyond their years. Leora listened to every word, her chest tight with a mixture of pride, anxiety, and sorrow. This debate should never have happened, she thought. These were her family, and yet she knew she must navigate the fears of the court with care.